I want to start just by talking Tigers trade deadline, and then we'll get into the rest of the league because that is its own conversation. I want to try to remain focused on what matters to moi, which is fine. It's my show. My show. Anyway, the Tigers basically said we need a bunch of pitchers. And a bunch of pitchers they got. They traded before the deadline proper. They traded for Chris Paddock, who is starting today. Unfortunately, gave up 3 runs in the first. But his first outing, I believe, was last Wednesday. He actually pitched a shutout against the Diamondbacks. So, we'll see how that works out. From there, they traded for Rafael Montero. They gave up a double-A infielder, who I don't believe was ranked in the prospect pool. It could have been. I didn't see. They also traded for Paul Sewald in exchange for cash. They then sent Paul Sewald, I believe, to the 60-day IL. So not sure if we're going to see him, but basically they paid to bring him in. Pretty much, I guess, a free agent to a certain extent. Then they trade for Charlie Morton, giving up a double-A pitcher who was unranked. I know that for sure. And the biggest move, I suppose, outside of the Paddock move, they trade for Kyle Finnegan. They give up a couple of pitching prospects. One of them, their number 15th ranked prospect according to MLB. And you look at their stats, you look at how they've done on the year, at least for the ones that I even knew the name of, which was Kyle Finnegan and Charlie Morton. You kind of scratch your head because Charlie Morton, I don't know what his ERA is now because he had a really nice night on Sunday against Philadelphia. But did I say Kyle Morton? Charlie Morton. I don't know if I mixed them up, but Charlie Morton, his ERA was in the 5s. And Kyle Finnegan, I believe, was pretty close to 5 as well. Now, granted, both those guys, since getting traded here, both of them have pitched pretty well. Obviously, Morton only the one outing on Sunday, but to a really good Phillies team on the road. And Finnegan, same deal. He pitched a couple of times against the Phillies. He pitched once against I believe he pitched against the Phillies on Saturday, and then he pitched last night, saving the game against the Twins. Both of them didn't give up a run. But then you think, okay, well, what's the point of Paul Sewald? And what's the point of Rafael Montero? And I don't really have an answer to that because I don't know. The only thing I will say is, well, they didn't really give up a whole lot for those guys, so it's kind of a low risk, high reward. You give up nothing to get a depth piece. So that's sort of my approach is, okay, they went out. What was the assignment essentially at the trade deadline? It was get better. And I think it's pretty obvious to me they got better at the deadline. It's not as though they got worse, which would be if they just, I guess, didn't do anything, because then by comparison's sake, they would have been worse than other teams. They went out and they got themselves 2 starting pitchers. Granted, they've lost one with Reese Olson, so they kind of replace him with Paddock/Morton. But 2 starting pitchers that I think both can be solid for you in a short stint, which is sort of where we're at. You're only a 2-month span in the regular season, and then you're into the postseason. And they get Kyle Finnegan, who I think is a really solid reliever. He's not, Johan Duran. We'll get to him later, but he's going to be pretty solid. And Chris Fetter, I trust his ability to get the best out of these pitchers. The question is, well, kind of twofold. Number one, did the Tigers do enough? Are they, quote unquote, back to being a World Series contending team? And the follow-up is this team too conservative? Are they not willing to go out and make that big swing splash move? They didn't get David Bednar. They didn't get Eugenio Suarez. They didn't get Johan Duran. They didn't even get Willie Castro. But again, there is this bubbling up of a lot of the sentiment of, I think, fans that have somewhat unrealistic expectations as to how this team is going to operate. The one thing I know is that this team is not going to operate like it did with Dave Dombrowski, because Scott Harris has not shown that that's the kind of GM that he is going to be. So the idea that we were going to trade anybody in our top 4 or even our top 5 was completely out of the realm possibility. So they weren't going to do that. So basically any player that went for a top 4 or 5 prospect in our system or in some other team system wasn't going to happen with us. The other thing, though, that does really bother me is this weird sentiment that, well, they just don't want to win. And this is made more front and center based on Scott Harris's comments after the trade deadline, where he was quoted as saying a couple of things. The first thing that he said was that he just didn't believe the Tarek Skubal window was a thing. Like he didn't believe that there is such a thing as a window. He said he used the word illusion and not illusion. The other thing he said, and we'll take these piece by piece. The other thing he said. Oh, hold on. What was the other thing he said? I just totally lost it. Okay, we'll start about the illusion. As far as that goes, my thought is, okay, what is he going to say? Like, realistically, what is he going to say? Well, we got about 3 years, and then we'll just be bad again. It's like, well, no, he's not going to say. He's going to say, yeah, of course. Like, every year we believe we are good enough to win. There's no. We have a 3-year window where we're going to be, trying to win. We're always trying to win. So that one didn't really bother me. The other thing, okay, now I remember. The other thing that people got really upset about, I don't know why, but they got upset because he said, my job is to make the playoffs. And people were like, oh, your job is not to make the playoffs. It's to win a World Series. And why didn't you say your job is to win a World Series? This might come as a shock to some people. And it was a shock to me. I didn't know this. In order to win the World Series, you have to make the playoffs. People don't know this. It's like, okay, if we're really going to get on semantics, when he got here, he said the goal was to win a World Series. Has that changed? Did he actually say, you know what, actually, I don't want to win a World Series anymore? No. He's saying the goal is to make the playoffs in order to win a World Series, not just, hang a banner for Detroit Tigers 2025 made the playoffs. No, that's obviously not what was meant. And you would have to be foolishly naive and incredibly uncharitable to Scott Harris to say that that's what he meant. That basically what he meant was, no, I just want to make the playoffs and just be good and not ever actually win a title. And there is this sentiment among some fans that you have 2 options where it's you either go all in and that's the only way to win a championship, or you don't ever do anything of risk and you just wait for the kids and you'll just be forever good. And neither of these are really realistic. There are times when you will have to make a big move that shocks the league or shocks fans at the very least. There may also be times where that move just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And maybe the way they saw it, and whether they're right or wrong, the moves that got made, namely probably for Eugenio Suarez or David Bednar or Durant or whomever, they just didn't make any sense given how they're viewing this. See, because they're not viewing it from this is the only year that the Tigers will ever be good. They're viewing it from okay, we really want these guys in our system for obviously their own sake as players, but also for potential moves in the future. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's probably what they're thinking. As far as whether I think the Tigers did enough, well, they have one of the top records in the American League. They have a really solid pitching staff, and they have probably the best pitcher in baseball in Tarek Skubal. He's almost certainly going to win Cy Young again this year. As far as their offense goes, as much as I would have liked to see another bat, their offense is pretty solid as well. I mean, especially when you add Kerry Carpenter back in from the injury list, the offense immediately showed itself to be much better. Again, the goal of the deadline was to get better. And they got better. So I'm not gonna be, throwing my hair, lighting my hair on fire and yelling and screaming, because it's not like they just sat there and said, "We like our guys. We're not going to do anything." They acknowledged a need, especially in the pitching staff, maybe almost entirely in the pitching staff, and they made moves that made sense to them. And this is the other thing too, because what people will say is, "Oh, well, what do you mean? Why didn't they go out and get Duran?" Well, maybe because Duran was not shopped to them. Or maybe because when Duran was shopped to them, the Twins said, "We want this player and this player and this player." And those players weren't an option. It just wouldn't have made any sense. But for the Phillies, where he did end up going, they actually wanted these particular players that the Phillies were more willing to part with. Again, maybe the strategy will work for the Phillies, maybe it won't. The point is, they're not like, it's not some universal thing where like, oh, it's our 4-6 versus the Phillies 4-6. No, these teams eye particular players, and they set a price in their head about what players they're willing to take or willing to give up for these other players. And that's just how it is. It's not a 1-to-1. It's not fantasy football, or I guess in this case, fantasy baseball. So am I overly ecstatic about the deadline? No, I think that would be stupid and homerish. Am I in total disrepair that I think this team was obfuscating on its duty and not actually doing what's right for the team? No, because that's also stupid. The team got better. We'll see if these moves, ultimately show their value over time. But I can't look at outside of maybe Paul Sewald and Montero. I look at the moves made, and I'm like, okay, pretty solid moves. The team acknowledged a need and didn't just sit around and let teams trade away and get better while they sat around and did nothing. So a fine deadline, not a blockbuster amazing deadline, but sometimes, you don't want, perfect to be the enemy of good. So you do the right moves, and you continue to do the right moves, and you continue to make the team better, and that's really all you can do. Hey, YouTube, if you like clips like that, hit the like, hit the subscribe button. We've got live shows every Tuesday night. Hope to see you there.